Hey guys, it's Mike from Eldorado Guitars, and I'm coming at you today with a video about importing guitar gear. I'd like to share with you a story that happened to me, and hopefully you guys can learn from it and don't do what I did and, actually have success with your importing of gear. So let me tell you what happened to me. So I was just hanging out one day 2 or 3 months ago, and I checked my account balance in my bank, and I noticed that I was missing $1,800 and some change dollars. And I was like, what is this? It said it was held, and I was like, what's a held money? And so I called the bank, and they gave me a special number to call. They said, oh, these are the people you have to call. And I said, okay. And so I called them, and it was someone at the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. And I was really confused. So I said, what is this about? And the lady that answered the phone said, oh, well, you imported what looks like here guitars in 2021 and 2022, and you didn't pay California use tax or sales tax on it. And I said, oh, well, I paid the duties when it got imported to the country, right? You know, like when you bring in something from overseas, they send you a bill and you have to pay it, and usually they won't deliver it until you pay the bill. Sometimes they do, like UPS or something, but sometimes they don't, like DHL. It kind of depends. So I told her I paid the duties when it came into the country, and she goes, oh, no. But this is use sales tax. This is different than the federal tax. This is a state tax. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, how did that get to $1,800 for importing 2 guitars? And she said, well, let me show you what I've got. And she showed me the 2 imports that I had made and the information that she had about them. And the information she had was from the shipper. So like what happens is when you buy a guitar, like I bought these in the UK. When you buy these in the UK, the guy at the shop fills out a little paper or whatever saying what the item is, where it was made, etc. And then he adds it to the manifest for shipping overseas, and then apparently the government scans these, and that's where they get this information from. So there must be some database where they're scanning these into, and they provide it to the government, but whether federal or state. And I tried to explain to her that these were Fender guitars made in Corona, not only in the United States, but in the state of California. And she said it didn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're bringing it back to the state or whatever. It doesn't matter. You have to pay the use tax. So I said, okay, well, how do we get to $1,800? And she says, well, it looks like here you imported 2 guitars with a value of $3,200, like roughly each, right? And I said, okay. I said, well, one of those I think I bought off of Reverb, so I paid sales tax on it. And she goes, oh, well, if you bought it off a third-party site, you have to submit the paperwork to us to show that you paid it. And I said, well, shouldn't you guys be able to get access to that just like you get access to the shipping forms? And she said, no, these third-party sites, they don't send us anything, blah, 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 blah. So I said, okay. So I went on Reverb, I found the paperwork from when I bought it, and I sent it to her, and she said, okay, you don't owe that tax on that one anymore. But the second one, did you buy it on Reverb? And I said, no, actually I didn't. I called the shop on the phone, and I paid via PayPal and, got it imported to the country. And she said, oh, well, then you owe tax on that. So I said, all right, well, the amount you have here, though, $3,200, is not accurate. Here's the PayPal receipt that shows that it wasn't $3,200. It was actually like, instead of 3,200 pounds, it was like $2,800 or something, right? Basically, the number was wrong. The number she had was wrong. It was too high. And so I said, the number you have is too high. It's wrong. And I showed her that proof, and she said, okay, well, we can adjust that one, yada, yada, yada. And I said, all right, great. And then she said, it looks here also you did something in 2023. And I said, okay, well, what happened in 2023? And she says, well, it looks like you imported an item for the, what was it? It was an item for the amplification of musical instruments. And I was like, oh, well, it's probably a guitar amp, right? And she said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, here it says $3,000. Do you have the receipt for that? Did you buy it on Reverb, etc.? And I said, whoa. I said, I actually do know what this is. This was an amp mod. So I had a 3-channel rectifier here. I sent it to Sweden to Henrik Hermansson to do a mod on it. Hermansson mods, you can check them out. They're very cool. And then he just sent it back to me. And she goes, oh, so you just had work done on it. And I said, yeah, just work done on it. There was no buying of an amp. And she goes, well, then why did he say $3,000 here on the import form? And I said, because he has to insure it for the full value. He can't just insure the mods that he did. He's got to insure the whole thing so that if the amp disappears, it breaks, whatever, UPS or FedEx will pay out. Otherwise, if you don't declare that value, they won't pay out the full value. And she goes, okay, well, it says here 3,000, blah, blah, blah. Can you show me the receipt for the work that was done? So luckily, I had the receipt from Heinrich, and I think it was like $800 worth of mods or something. And she goes, okay, well then I guess you don't owe that, blah, 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 blah. And so long story short, at the end of the day, the $1,800 they had taken out of my bank account, I only ended up owing something like $400. So what they had was basically incorrect information, which was the stuff that I bought on Reverb that I had paid the tax on. And then the other stuff that I hadn't paid the tax on, they had the wrong amount that they were charging me the tax on. Does that make sense? So basically they had flawed information. And I was just so blown away, I mean, I used to be a lawyer a long time ago, so I don't know anything about tax law really, but I just was like, I know the basic rules of lawyering, right? And usually you have to give people notice before you can do something to them, right? It's called due process or service, right? You have to prove that you contacted them or at least tried to contact them and that, they're ignoring you, etc. And I asked her this on the phone, and she said, oh, that doesn't apply to the state of California. The state is allowed to just take stuff without, we're allowed to seize things without any notice, without any proof, without anything. And I said, that's messed up. I was like, I mean, I'm an American. I'm like, didn't we fight a war over this, over illegal duties, right, in 1776, right? I mean, it just seems crazy that you guys are allowed to, the state is allowed to just take money from my account with no real proof other than this information you have, which is wrong. And then the burden is on me to prove either that I paid the tax or that your information is wrong. It's totally wild. And she was like, well, that's the way it works, blah, 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 blah. And then she made a joke with me at the end and said, you didn't import anything in 2025, did you? And I said, actually, I did. This diesel Blueface VH4, but I bought it on Reverb. So I have the receipt and I can prove that I paid the tax. And she says, oh, well, you better hold on to that because I'm sure you're going to be getting a notice from us. And I'm just like, I am literally talking to you about it right now. Can we just close this case? I mean, I was completely... You can hear I'm choking on my own rage here, okay? I was just totally blown away that this is the process we have in the United States of America. The process is the state just says you owe this based on whatever some jackass wrote on a piece of paper in the UK, and then you're allowed to seize my assets without notice until I prove that your information was wrong or that I pay. Just absolutely bonkers, totally bananas. So the reason I'm telling you guys all this is please learn from my mistake, okay? So if you, lesson one, if you import something from overseas, you better be prepared to pay both the federal duties and the state duties, okay? So you're gonna get hit twice, at least in this state. That may not be in every state, but in this state, okay? Number two, lesson learned, I would really recommend buying stuff on a site like Reverb or through an online shop or someplace where there's gonna be a record of you paying sales tax, because if you're going to import it, they're going to find out. You can't do a thing where like you do the PayPal thing where you call and you pay under the, you pay on the download. You can't do that because there's import records. So I would strongly suggest buying from Reverb or some other online marketplace where you have a record of the tax that you paid. And this applies even for things not from overseas, even from Canada, Mexico, right? Like for example, I got this 2-rock from Canada, and I'm sure they're going to come knocking on me about it, right? So the second thing is I would really recommend buying through a site where you can prove that. And number three is, I hate to say this, but keep meticulous records. I'm not a good record keeper, okay? I'm bad at bureaucracy. I hate red tape. That's why I work at startups. That's why I'm not a lawyer anymore, because I can't deal with all the bureaucratic BS. But I think in the limited times that you're going to import something in your guitar career or in your life, It's probably relatively easy to keep that information. And now, with phones and stuff, you can just take a picture of it. There's no real reason to, not have that information. So that would be number three piece of advice. And then maybe one more thing I'll tack on is just be aware that there used to be an exemption for purchases under a certain amount. So this did not apply to me, okay? My guitars that were too expensive and the amp is too expensive, it doesn't apply. But if you're sitting there thinking, well, Mike, I've bought pedals from overseas before, or I bought a Squier or something from overseas, and I didn't get hit with any of this tax. It was probably because it falls under what's called the de minimis exemption, which means that the government doesn't enforce things under a certain amount. You might have seen this recently in the news with like Temu and stuff, that if you bought enough stuff from them, they would break it up into multiple shipments to keep each shipment under the de minimis maximum, the amount. And I think that was $700. Somebody can correct me in the comments. It's like $700. And the president just announced that that's gone. That's gone away. So now they're going to get you on everything. So if you're thinking to yourself like, yeah, I bought a pedal, or I bought an inexpensive guitar, or I bought a speaker or something from overseas and I didn't get taxed on it, now you might. So it's kind of actually the worst time in a long time to import things from other countries. And that's the intent. The intent is they want us to buy stuff from here, right? So my advice would just be very careful right now. Keep meticulous records. Try and buy from a known shop or an online portal like Reverb, and don't think that you're going to get away with something because it's a very small amount, because that de minimis exemption is now gone. Okay? So please take my lessons learned. It's a funny story now, I guess, right? I guess I can laugh about it now and just call the state stupid and all those things, which they are. But at the end of the day, they're holding, what's that line from The Matrix? They're guarding all the doors, they're holding all the keys, right? So you're not going to beat Uncle Sam. So just please take my advice, and I hope you guys learned from that. If this was helpful for you guys, please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and I've got some other new videos coming out later this week that are going to be really excellent, and I hope you guys tune in for them. Thanks again, guys. This is Mike from Eldorado Guitars. Have a good week.